She's a very influential researcher in experimental economics, and she just completed a PhD course offered to a crowd of 35 students from all over Europe. Welcome to Coffee with Lise Vesterlund.
Oh, thank you so much.
Lise, your two main research areas are charitable giving and gender gaps in the labor market. Why these two research areas?
I think they were just the two questions I got most interested in early on in my career. I was born and raised in Denmark, and I went to the US for graduate school, and I was very intrigued by how the US was very, very differently run in terms of charitable giving playing a much larger role. In Denmark, we tend to tax people and distribute them in the way that we sort of agree is a reasonable way of doing it. In the US, it's more voluntary that we provide similar services. So that I found that very interesting. I was studying under Jim Andrioni, who is the leader in charitable giving. So it was something that I found very fascinating. At the same time, coming from Denmark, I was also born and raised in a society where I felt like men and women were treated very equally. I had studied math and physics and then gone on to economics, and I never really thought about men and women being so different. My own mother had been working my whole life and was a manager, and then when I got to the US, it seemed very different from what it was in Denmark. So both of those aspects of coming from Denmark and going to the US really triggered my interest in both of those questions, because it seemed so different from the background that I had.
Fascinating. Your most cited paper is the piece in Quarterly Journal of Economics from 2007. Do women shy away from competition? Do men compete too much? And I think the answer to both of those questions is yes. That was back in 2007. What's happened in the research on this topic of gender and competitiveness since then? What do we know now that we didn't know then?
What we found in that study was that men enter competition a lot more than women, even when we condition on their ability. So even we looked at a scenario where men and women were equally qualified, and men chose to compete a lot more than women, and we found in this study that men were a lot more confident about their own ability than women. So we explained this tremendous gender gap in going into the competition by men being very confident, but also by them really enjoying the competitive environment. The wonderful thing that has happened afterwards is that we have found that these differences that we document are very, very robust. So they have been shown all over the US, they've been shown in Europe. There are very fundamental differences. We've found that these differences are predictive of what happens to you later in life. So I would say that it's a very replicable result that carries out to lots of environments. So it's a very intriguing finding, precisely because it is so robust. And what has been very nice in terms of seeing the advancement of the field is that experimental economics has been very criticized for finding things that may not be so robust. This is a finding that is very robust. So it allows us to sort of think about what are the mechanisms that we can put in place that would reduce some of these differences. The primary reason for looking at this is that we continue to see women really struggle to sort of climb the corporate ladder. There are very large gender differences in terms of advancement. And one of the things we were pointing to in this early study was the gender differences in competition and confidence. And it suggests that we should really try to think about the way that we get people to advance. Is the solution to do affirmative action? Is it to have group competition? What is it that helps us improve?
based on your research, what kind of advice would you give a CEO on their recruitment strategies and human resource management pertaining to gender issues? You want to recruit the best people, that includes women, and you want to keep them on board. What advice would you give to a CEO based on your research?
Well, so that's a really important question. I think it's a question that many managers are really struggling with. There's a lot of demands to improve diversity in corporations. In my more recent work, we have started spending more time looking specifically at the tasks that men and women hold in the workplace. It's not so easy to say we should train women to become more competitive and super confident, because if I think about the ideal manager, it's hard for me to imagine that we would think that the most competitive and overconfident manager is the best manager. I think in our recent work, where we're really trying to look at the tasks that people do in the workplace, we've started focusing on how much time men and women are spending on tasks that could be characterized as being promotable versus non-promotable, and finding very systematic patterns where women are spending a lot more time on non-promotable work. And part of the reason why they end up with non-promotable work is not just the gender differences in competition, but rather when we're allocating non-promotable work, it tends to be work that nobody wants to do. Women are more inclined to take on a task that is non-promotable. They will volunteer for work in the workplace. Similarly, we're finding that managers, if they have to ask someone to do something that nobody wants to do in the workplace, they will systematically ask women to do it. And when women are asked to do something that is not promotable, they will say yes, which means that they are constantly being asked. So while it's very hard to figure out how to sort of improve on the super competitive men and overconfident men, I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can go after on the non-promotable work, because the way that we tend to allocate it is by volunteering. And it is, we really have not been paying attention to how we allocate these tasks. So alternative ways of doing it is to say, let's take turns. Let's randomly assign the task. Let's try to keep track of how much non-promotable work is being done in the corporation and who it is who's doing it, so that we sort of are cognizant of the load that we're putting on a certain group of the population. It is not, the concern in having gendered task allocation is that if women are busy doing a lot of non-promotable work, we may not be able to identify what their true talent is. So if they're constantly working on the clients that doesn't bring in a lot of revenue, I will never know how good they will be at working for the client that does. So I really think the best advice we can give to management today is to look at how they're allocating tasks. When a student comes out of NHH, are they given the same opportunities in terms of those early tasks, so that we really can identify what the talent is? I think that's the best advice right now.
Fascinating. Given the systematic nature of these findings, is this nurture or is it really hardwired nature? These differences in gender attitudes to competition or taking on these non-promotable tasks?
So I think for any of these differences, it would be surprising if it wasn't both nature and nurture. When it comes to the way that we take on non-promotable tasks, it is not something that is robust within the individual. The tendency we have to take on tasks that nobody else wants to do really depends on who else you're with. So we ran studies where we both had men and women in the room. Women took on many more tasks than men. But then if I change the room and it's only women, they cut back on how much they take on, because they know they can rely on the other women to take on this additional task. And similarly, if we have only men in the room, it's not that men are hardwired not to volunteer, it's just that they don't volunteer for these tasks if the women are there, because they're expected to take on. So in the case of taking on non-promotable work, I think we're basically playing a coordination game, and we have coordinated on playing a game where the women take on the work that doesn't lead to promotion. And that's a very convenient game to play for some people. So I don't think that taking on, it depends on the situation. We have a tendency to think that women should be more altruistic and nurturing, and that's why they're doing it. But we're seeing in our study, where we admittedly have removed many of the aspects of the real world, that it is not all coming from women wanting to sacrifice their training and career for the collective of the firm. It is really that they're expected to step up to taking on the non-promotable work, and they do. And they're doing it in part because they're being expected to do so. And given this expectation that they will take it on, it also makes it very risky for women not to say yes to the less promotable work, because we have seen many cases where women sort of violate the norm of what they're supposed to do, and that it results in backlash. So it can be quite dangerous just to say, I don't want to do this.
Tough balancing acts.
Yeah.
In any case, I'm so thankful that you took upon yourself the task of speaking with me here this afternoon. And it's been a pleasure, Lise, and we look forward to seeing you in Bergen again soon.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.